Good morning, Prabhu.
Good morning, Sarvatma Prabhu.
My obeisance. All glories to Sheila Prabhupada.
Panchakalpa Tirubhistar Kripasinabhivitapati Nam Pavniyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha.
Save it for a real Vaishnava.
A Vaishnav does not think himself or herself a Vaishnav.
Could be the case. A non-Vaishnava also thinks himself non-Vaishnava. So let's begin. If you wish to do some Mangalacharana, some prayers, some chanting, whatever you want to do first, and then we'll get right into the thick of it. Whatever you just habit.
Om Jnana Timirandhasya Janandana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitang Jaina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Panchakalpa Tirubhistar Kripasinabhivitapati Nam Pavniyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasti Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
So
perhaps we could welcome all the devotees, all the Vaishnavas, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for accepting the invitation. For those who are not aware, I haven't seen the previous interview or haven't read the text I sent. Rasamandala Prabhu is an educational consultant specializing in philosophy, religion, and ethics from a Hindu perspective. That's how the academia will accept. And he's a PhD candidate at Cambridge University in the UK, where he is residing and speaking from. Please take it away.
Yeah, I live near the manor, actually, near Bhaktivedanta Manor. I don't live in Cambridge right now.
Okay.
I'd like to, but due to circumstances, I'm living very close to Bhaktivedanta Manor. So it's a 50 minutes drive to Cambridge, the real Cambridge. I know you have one over there, but that's a replica.
Everything we have here is a replica. So maybe if you have a topic to begin with, you go ahead. Otherwise, I will just ask you things, and we can go from there.
Yeah, I sent you a few notes, and
yes, I'm looking at them right now.
Yeah, but what I could do, I could read a verse actually from the Bhagavatam, which may be appropriate, and then perhaps you could go to our notes and kind of take this as a kind of interview.
Okay.
Would that be all right with you?
Yes, it would be totally
all
right.
So this is a verse from the Bhagavatam. Perhaps I could actually pay our obeisances to the author. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This is from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 17, verse 45. Itang bhuta nubhavo yang abhimanyu suto nripaha yasya pala yatak shonim yuyam satraya dikshataha. Translation: Maharaj Parikshit, the son of Abhimanyu, is so experienced that by dint of his expert administration and patronage, it has been possible for you to perform a sacrifice such as this. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The Brahmanas and Sannyasis are expert in the spiritual administration of society, whereas the Kshatriyas or the administrators are expert in the material peace and prosperity of human society. Both of them are the pillars of all happiness, and therefore they are meant for full cooperation for common welfare. Maharaj Parikshit was experienced enough to drive away Kali from his field of activities and thereby make the state receptive to spiritual enlightenment. If the common people are not receptive, it is very difficult to impress upon them the necessity of spiritual enlightenment. Austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness, the basic principles of religion, prepare the ground for the reception of advancement in spiritual knowledge, and Maharaj Parikshit made this favorable condition possible. Thus, the rishis of Naimisharanya were able to perform the sacrifice for 1,000 years. In other words, without state support, no doctrines of philosophy or religious principles can progressively advance. There should be complete cooperation between the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas for this common good. Even up to Maharaj Ashoka, the same spirit was prevailing. Lord Buddha was sufficiently supported by King Ashoka, and thus his particular cult of knowledge was spread all over the world. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the first canto, 17th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Punishment and Reward of Kali. I'll read the verse again. Idang bhutan ubhavo yang abhimanyu sato nripaha yasya pala yataksho nim yuyam kshatraya dikshitaha. Maharaj Parikshit, the son of Abhimanyu, is so experienced that by dint of his expert administration and patronage, it has been possible for you to perform a sacrifice such as this. Hare Krishna. I thought that was an interesting verse. Just to let you know, I was a little bit inspired to find this verse with the passing of Queen Elizabeth II here in the UK, which had quite a profound impact on me, more than I was expecting, because I know I'm meant to be spiritually detached, which of course I'm not particularly. But it had the whole passing and the ceremonies connected with that had an effect on me and made me reflect on the benefits, perhaps, of long-standing tradition. And by long-standing tradition, I don't mean just a scholarly tradition, as with our parampara, but with governance and the need for good governance in any country, or perhaps within ISKCON itself, in order to actually make Krishna conscious, the propagation of Krishna consciousness successful in a sustainable manner. So that had quite an impact on me, partly because I was born, or I came into this body, as we say in ISKCON, 18 days after Queen Elizabeth II ascended the throne. So she's always been with me in my life. But what was very interesting was the public response, and particularly the perception that she had actually been dedicated to the service of the nation and the people. And that idea of servant leadership was very prominent. It would be very easy, of course, to take a cynical view and say that she was a kami and therefore all of this is false. I don't think such a view is really one that we should take. I detected in seeing some of the videos and so on, there being some sincerity of spirit there in that idea of service and public service. And it made me reflect on the need for us to also consider these virtues and to consider perhaps the role of governance in pushing forward with Krishna consciousness, as well as just the Yuga Dharma itself. Although we could also look at the idea of the Yuga Dharma helping us develop all the good qualities of the demigods that we need to push forward Krishna consciousness, and how that may extend to the building of a society, a social structure, to building community and so on, that is necessary, as it seems to be in this verse, for actually successfully implementing or delivering spiritual knowledge. That's some of the background anyway. It was a very personal journey for me. And what was interesting is one supporter over here, you may have heard of him. He's, I think, a comedian. I don't know him too well. And also what we might call, in today's language, an influencer called Russell Brand. And he was of the opinion that the Queen was of herself, of ideal character, but he's against monarchy, against the monarchy. But my view was that actually that tradition, in this case the monarchy, cannot really be separated from our individual virtues. In other words, our virtues are somehow supported by community, the communities and traditions with which we associate, whether by birth or by choice. And that idea that, you know, values must be supported by some kind of cultural tradition. So actually, I thought that in a sense, although the Queen was lauded for her personal commitment to public service, by the way, I saw there was one video where she signed an important document, and it showed you the document, and she'd signed it, "Your servant," which I found very interesting, because that is the way which many of us who are associated with ISKCON, many devotees, sign their letters and emails. So I thought that was extremely interesting. I did later find out some letters, I think, to Shama Sundara from Sheila Prabhupada, where he was saying he supported monarchy, actually. There are other places where he says it's not possible in this yuga, but he did support it, and he wanted the devotees to have some kind of meeting with, as he was then, Prince Charles, Prince of Wales, as he was then, now King Charles III, and with Queen Elizabeth and other leaders to try and set up a parliament in which devotees would participate. Interesting, but it made me think very much about the need for us to set up tradition and to ask the question, what is our culture? Do we have a culture? Where is it located? Or perhaps do we need to build one? These are some of the questions that came up for me.
We would like to hear the answers to that.
I'm sorry if I'm speaking about the Queen and the King to many of you in the United States. I know you gave up the King, who happened to be quite mad at the time. You gave up the King and you ended up with Trump and Biden. So good luck to you.
We're not exactly supporting our perpetual form of government, so-called democracy, where every idiot has an opinion and can impose it by a vote. Still, it's interesting. Prabhupada actually said that the Queen must be very, very intelligent. Those are his words. Tell us, I'm looking at your notes here, and these are very interesting topics that probably demand a time slot by themselves, each of them.
How much time do we have, by the way? Because I'd like to leave time for some discussion. I see there's a lot of devotees here. I see their names more than their pictures. I see Bhubrit Prabhu, Hare Krishna, and I see a lot of other names.
We are actually not too restricted by time. Usually the class goes all the way for an hour, but if there are things to be discussed, we can go on as the since the classes are nowadays mostly virtual, the regular programming, Guru Puja and greeting the deities will take place regardless of what we do. So there is time. There is plenty of time.
Okay. I don't want to eat into people's personal time. It's extremely valuable.
No, they're not right. They're going to just sign off if that's the need.
Okay. Well, I'll try and finish at 1:45 or 1:50 for questions and answers, I think.
Okay.
So let's take about 35 minutes for the interview and then take questions.
So let's begin with the value of long-standing tradition in sustaining and perpetuating truth and virtue, and maybe linked to the topic that you were discussing about the monarchy. Although the monarchy that we are usually addressing, at least in the Bhagavatam, is somewhat of a constitutional monarchy where people actually have rights and freedom, and their opinion is counted. And there's even stories of Brahmana complaining that to the king that it was his fault that his son died. I mean, I don't think you could do that in England or anywhere else. Just don't go complain to the government that your kid is gone and it's their fault. So tell us, what's your take on the value of long-standing tradition in sustaining and perpetuating truth and virtue?
Well, I think it's very, very important. I think there's and I'll probably move on to the second subject I mentioned in my notes to you. I think there's a kind of perception, which is quite right, that all this is temporary and therefore a waste of time. And there was a very interesting poem by it's about 500 years old, by one English poet and writer who spoke, James Shirley, who quoted, and I'll quote, if I may, "The glories of our blood and state are shadows, not substantial things. There is no armor against fate. Scepter and crown must tumble down, and in the dust be equal made with the poor, crooked scythe and spade." And I think many of us will appreciate that scepter and crown must tumble down. But it was very interesting in the ceremony that was held in London, in Westminster Abbey, the scepter and the crown and the third symbol of the monarch, which is the orb, which is like a globe with the cross on the top. They were actually taken and handed back, placed back on the altar, as if that power and that sovereignty and the privilege that goes with it were returned to God. And they will again be invested in the new monarch. Very, very interesting. So I think we understand that everything is temporary. But there's another way of looking at this, and that is, if we're going to actually perpetuate in this world the Sanatan Dharma, that means we need very long traditions. There is a benefit in actually having those traditions that help perpetuate and embed what I would call enduring truths and values, or we could say eternal truths and values even. So there's another way of looking at this, is saying rather than needing no tradition, we need very long-standing traditions, which we have ourselves, of course, if we think about, if we reflect. So I think one of the problems that we're faced within our movement, and I think it's useful to look not only at some of our strengths, but some of our challenges. I think we need to do that as a society as well as individuals. We always need to look at what our challenges are. It's not unusual that we have challenges, that we somehow fall short of the standards which we ourselves set or have been given. I don't think that's something we should shy away from, looking at those both personally and as a society. And I think, we need to look at that idea of a long-standing tradition and how those virtues and values are actually perpetuated. I've lost my train of thought a little bit, but I think it is very, very important. Let me see if I've got some notes on this, actually. What I wanted to mention was actually how, probably because ISKCON started in the late 60s, and of course, in the late 60s, and the beginning years spanned the late 60s and the early 70s, we could say. That was the time of the hippie counterculture. And there was a huge anti-establishment mood at that time. However, Sheila Prabhupada was not happy with many of the values that were identified with the hippie counterculture. By the way, there were good things. Don't get me wrong. I think it was a very significant time, and there was actually a genuine search for raising our consciousness, for example, and against the materialistic way of life. However, being against the materialistic way of life doesn't necessarily bestow upon us a spiritual way of life or a spiritual culture. And I think it was Tamal Krishna Goswami in his book, I've got it here, A Living Theology of Krishna Bhakti, which is the results, the fruits of his PhD, also at Cambridge University, interestingly. But he actually, on page 50 of that book, discusses how ISKCON really wasn't able to, or didn't manage to, the phrase is got here, divorce itself from the counterculture. It didn't manage to do that. So we've brought in a lot of that establishment mood. And I started to reflect personally on something called, I don't know whether you've heard of it, year zero approach, a year zero approach. The year zero approach it's particularly identified with Pol Pot of the killing fields of Cambodia. And the whole idea of that, I found a definition of year zero. I'll find that and I'll read that out. I'm not sure where I got this definition from. I should have the reference, but it was from either a good dictionary or the Encyclopedia Britannica. Excuse me, I don't have the exact reference, but I could find it if anyone wants it. Year zero holds that, and I quote, all cultural traditions within a society must be completely destroyed or discarded, and that a new revolutionary culture must replace it, starting from scratch. Let me read that again. All cultural traditions within a society must be completely destroyed or discarded, and that a new revolutionary culture must replace it, starting from scratch. Its precursor was the French Revolution. I think the idea goes back to the French Revolution, although I'm sure that many revolutionaries had similar ideas prior to that. For example, in the French Revolution, they introduced a decimal calendar where there were 10 hours in a day, 100 minutes in an hour, and 100 seconds within each minute. The seconds were a little different than our seconds, naturally. I think they were about 35% different. I'm not sure whether they were shorter or longer. Our mathematicians can work that out. I don't know how you feel about a 10-hour day, but it didn't work. Somehow or other it didn't work. But that idea was there. We could probably also identify it with Mao Zedong and the Cultural Revolution in China, when many of the relics of their previous culture, long-standing culture, of course, in China, were destroyed systematically in order to establish communism. So I think I would actually say the evidence suggests that a year zero approach has always been disastrous. We can forget Jean-Jacques Rousseau's idea of noble savages. When cultures collapse, there's usually disaster and a lot, of course, tyranny at the same time. I think it raises questions for us about what our culture is going to be and where we find some of the, I mean, obviously we go to our parampara and to Sheila Prabhupada especially for spiritual truths, but as relevant to the verse I read at the beginning, I'm wondering where we look to for moral sustenance and for our virtues and perpetuating virtues and so on, which according to Sheila Prabhupada are the support of spiritual development itself. And of course, all of us who have taken initiation, we've taken one vow to chant 16 rounds of the holy name, but we've taken there's 4 other obligations, which is to follow those 4 regulative principles, which, by the way, have associated values, which Sheila Prabhupada mentions in the purport. So I'm wondering what our approach should be to how we interact with the moral and cultural traditions in the particular settings, whether it be a country or community in which we find ourselves as devotees and into which we're born very often as well. So what should our approach be to them? Whether we totally discard them, I guess the other possibility is we adopt them uncritically as well, and that may be problematic. But this is the kind of question I'd like to raise here.
Maybe we can open the forum for the devotees. And there is a story that I recall. Prabhupada was visiting Gainesville, Florida, in 1971, and he actually the student government paid him $1,000 to come, which was a very large sum at the moment, especially for a spiritual figure. And one of the programs that took place, of course, they packed Prabhupada's day from morning to night, and Prabhupada agreed. And one of the programs was a radio interview at 11 p.m. And so Prabhupada agreed to go, and the devotees drove him right to the entrance of the building to where the radio station on campus was. And when they parked the car, when he stopped the car for Prabhupada to get off, Prabhupada said, "Don't you see? There was a sign that said no parking here." This was on a university campus at 11 p.m. There's not even squirrels are there at that time. And still, Prabhupada didn't want to get off at a place because it was violating the law. That wasn't even a state law or a city law, simply a university. Just like when you get a ticket for parking at the wrong place at a university, it's not a real ticket. I mean, it is in one sense because you have an obligation to pay it, but it's not going to reflect on your driver's license. It's not going to go to the DMV. So Prabhupada, and his definition of a devotee, most often said a devotee is a perfect gentleman. So this is, and sometimes we tend to add the word Vedic to everything, as if we have a perfect idea what Vedic means, and because this is our culture, this is our history, but we just rubber stamp this word into the actions that we take, or the philosophies that we follow, or the culture that we think that should be the appropriate one. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think rubber stamping, you mentioned that word. I think yeah, that opens up a whole other field of discussion. And the one thing that I mentioned in the notes I sent to you is how we reduce Srila Prabhupada's philosophy. I call it a kind of reductionism. Parallel to that, there's also the idea of using many slogans, cliches, catchphrases, political rhetoric in a rather constraining way. I mean, I think we have our own concepts as coming in the tradition of Chaitanya. We have our own metaphors, and they're extremely valuable for defining our specific worldview. I think the challenge is when the language becomes too constraining and it doesn't allow that exercise of independent thought that is also extremely valuable, and Srila Prabhupada wanted, in addition to our dedication to the tradition and its philosophical insights. And I think that tension is important. I think it's very relevant to what's going on in the world today, because there are culture wars starting in ISKCON between the West and India, for example. And these have the power to actually divide ISKCON's members and the society. And I think we need to address some of those openly. That may not be the business of all of us, I understand, but we're aware of those issues, and we need to have some kind of grip on them and to understand how to respond to them. And I think these are very important discussions for us to have. And I think, as you mentioned, the Vedas, you see, it's interesting because the word Veda refers to a specific body of scripture. Maybe scripture isn't the best word, actually, because that may have a certain baggage. It's really the culminative knowledge of a spiritual and educational tradition. And Srila Prabhupada's books kind of represent that tradition, if you like. And it is a scholarly tradition. It's not just what we could say is a religious tradition as it's sometimes understood. And I think we need to appreciate that, actually. So Veda refers to a specific set of scriptures, but Veda also means knowledge, and it has a generic meaning, which is all inclusive. And therefore any kind of understanding or realization that is commensurate with or consistent with the Vedic conclusions is also accepted as Vedic. It is part of the inclusive Sanatan Dharma, if you like. So therefore that tension between, if you like, the dialectic between understanding there's some particularity, we have a particular tradition, we have some roots in India, whether one defines that geographically or politically, and that's another question. But there is very much the idea of universal truth and knowledge, neither being, Srila Prabhupada gave the example that you don't say this is Hindu gold or this is Muslim gold. Gold is gold, knowledge is knowledge. And I think we need to appreciate that universal nature of knowledge, while at the same time having appropriate reverence for and dedication to our own traditions. Does that make sense? I don't know. Sarvatma Prabhu.
Yes, it does. Any devotees have any comments or realizations that they want to share? There are perhaps questions, the subjects.
Well, Brit Prabhu, anything? I saw a movement in your face. Any questions or comments? I can't see everyone here.
No, sorry, I don't have anything, but it's a very interesting discussion. I'm interested to hear more, I guess, about how you feel traditions should be established, in ISKCON, the culture of ISKCON, how we go about doing that, and maybe where we feel it should be heading.
Thank you. I mean, I tend to think that actually we have to build our culture. I'm not sure where it exists in a way that is suitable to ISKCON's global remit and its global identity, if you like. I'm sure we can go to places in Bengal and Bangladesh where the Chaitanya Vaishnava tradition is flourishing, and we'll find examples of how to live. But unless that is somehow articulated in a way that makes it relevant to those of us living in, say, London in 2022, I don't think it'll be sufficient. So I'm of the opinion that we have to build a tradition somehow or other. And that Srila Prabhupada's books have given us the tools and the knowledge and the tools for building that tradition. And therefore, I'm a little worried about this reductionism. And I can give some examples of that. The tendency to finish a large number of Srimad Bhagavatam classes with the statement that something similar to it's Kali Yuga, it's impossible to implement all this, therefore just chant Hare Krishna. I'm concerned about that for a number of reasons. One is, even though we may not be perfectly able to adjust, say, our social systems and so on, I'm doubtful as whether that means we should neglect them altogether. Because something's not perfectly applicable, do we give up our any kind of endeavor to do that? I think that's a mistaken interpretation. Secondly, I did hear one senior devotee who spoke, I think it was a Srila Prabhupada memory, and said we could take one of Srila Prabhupada's books or any number of his books, and we could separate the pages out. We could shuffle the pages, select 3 at random, and the message would be the same. I think it's true. I mean, I give credit there. Krishna, the message of Krishna consciousness would be there. It would be connected to that highest truth and to the Yuga Dharma. But that approach worries me also, because I think I asked the question is, why did Srila Prabhupada, and my appeal is a little bit emotive here, I guess, why did Srila Prabhupada spend so much time translating his books in the early hours of the day if we simply want to reduce them to something that could be circumscribed by a religious tract? We could put it on a religious tract, just chant Hare Krishna. I don't think that's really what Srila Prabhupada wanted for his books. And I think there are some quotes where it is clear what he wanted. For example, the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 5, verse 25, I find interesting. And I'll quote that if I may. Human intellect is development for advancement of learning in art, science, philosophy, physics, chemistry, psychology, economics, politics, etc. By culture of such knowledge, the human society can attain perfection of life. Let me read that again. By culture of such knowledge, the human society can attain perfection of life. This perfection of life culminates in the realization of the Supreme Being, Vishnu. So there are, in other places, Srila Prabhupada explains how many of these, if you can call them what I might call scholarly disciplines, if you like, or subjects, if we're at school, or if we think about the Renaissance in Europe, we may call them the humanities. Srila Prabhupada mentions that these subjects, these branches of knowledge, if you will, sorry, I'm struggling for words a little, these branches of knowledge are there in Srila Prabhupada's books. And he wanted us to recognize them. Should they be connected to Krishna? Absolutely. But should they be neglected? No. Not at all. They cannot be neglected. It seems that Srila Prabhupada wanted us to develop these worthy areas of human endeavor, link them to Krishna, and to actually demonstrate how we have as a society, as a spiritual tradition, drawing from our ancient heritage. We have the best system of education. We have the best system of governance. We have the best moral philosophy. We have the best means of counseling, giving counsel to others in terms of psychology. We have many very interesting perspectives on what is economics. And I think, coming back to my point, can we actually engage those who are expert in those subjects and demonstrate to them through our own learning and indeed our own character that actually we have something valuable to offer the modern conversation? Because I think we have to, I think Sheila Prabhupada wanted this, we have to authentically enter into that conversation rather than simply poo-poo it. I'm not sure if you have that expression in America. Condemn it and not be able to offer anything better. And Sheila Prabhupada was very clear on this. I wonder if I can find a quote here just to finish off, and we can take the discussion further. I think I've got something here. Yes, Sheila Prabhupada, he's talking about unemployment, actually. It's a very dangerous position within society. Now, this unemployment question is very strong all over the world. They'll plan that, quote, this government is not good. That system is not good. He's not good. And he'll do nothing. He'll personally do nothing, just like the hippies. They criticize everything, but not do anything. So the ability to criticize is very easy. And probably one of the problems, I think, in modern democracy, that many people are able to criticize and they'll offer their solutions. But were they in government, would they be able to do better? So over here in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same in America, I know it's the same in America, then we have the phenomenon of celebrities, film stars, actors, musicians, giving their opinions on moral issues. But Sheila Prabhupada wasn't too happy with that. Got another quote somewhere, see if I can find it, where he was very, very clear when he himself was asked on a subject. He refused to give his opinion because he said, I'm not qualified in that. I don't know about it. I can't find the quote. I'll see if I can find it at some point for you. But he actually said that I'm not qualified. So he was very clear. If you're going to speak on a subject, are you an expert in it? And interestingly, in one place, I may have mentioned this last time we spoke, Sarvatma Prabhu, he said actually doctors may disagree on a subject.
Yeah,
So
Prabhupada said, I'm not a doctor. I can't give an opinion on that.
Yeah, that's the quote I'm looking for. I've got it somewhere. I'll see if I can find it later. But he was clear. But the other point he was making is they were doctors. They're qualified. So if we're going to take up a service in ISKCON, do we need to become qualified for that service? Or is our only qualification that, and these qualifications are important, the devotional qualifications. We have good sadhana, we have good character and so on. We're sincere. Or do we actually need some level of expertise to complement that? And I think it's clear, think that we have to also have those skills to take up those positions, any position of service, but particularly those connected to leadership, referring back to the verse that I read at the beginning of this interview. I think we have to actually develop those skills deliberately. And I think when it comes to leadership, you cannot avoid that, because the problem with leadership is as soon as we actually are not qualified, it's like any other service or occupation. As soon as we're not qualified, we make mistakes. The challenge is in leadership, as soon as we make mistakes, those mistakes have a very clear moral element. So we become morally culpable by not having those skills, because you're going to make mistakes in a leadership position. And you're going to affect other people's lives in significant ways that may impact also on their faith. So I think actually it's incumbent upon us all to actually develop these skills and the body of knowledge and the values associated with that for leadership. Yeah.
In Spanish, we there is a saying, "El que sabe sabe y el que no sabe es jefe," which means who knows knows, and who doesn't know is made boss. This is obviously a cynical view, but it kind of shows a little bit of what we did in the past. Hopefully, it's no longer the idea in the present in ISKCON that we, for example, made educators, teachers in Gurukula, people who, for what reason or another, they couldn't cook, they couldn't worship the deities, they couldn't distribute books. As well, just send them to teach. That should be easy enough, and with terrible consequences. Very unqualified. So I think we should have by now learned the lesson that in order to perform a duty, it's not enough that you chant your rounds and you follow the principles. You actually have to be qualified. And this applies, going back to the other subject that you mentioned about culture, that we really pat ourselves in the back thinking that we do have a culture, but we actually don't. Because if you talk about what is music, what is Vedic music, or what is our tradition in music, and we obviously there are very skilled musicians all over the world, and it doesn't take too much skill to do kirtan from a musical point of view. From a devotional point of view is different, but someone who can play 3 chords is automatically promoted to kirtan leader, which is and it may be a 2-hour same melody kirtan that it may be appealing to those who are in the frenzy of ecstasy by chanting the holy name. But if you actually get musicians from all different categories of music, whereas jazz, classical, etc., they will find it musically quite primitive, if I may use it, and not only that, but actually somewhat bothersome. That's why I struggle with the idea of that. What is better? Let's say someone leads Guru Puja in a temple, and why not? And I use why not someone play the harmonium very nicely and sing melodiously? If someone comes from the street, a civilized cultural person, intelligent, affluent, whatever good qualities you can attribute, would that person be more inclined to inquire about what's behind this if the reception was a melodious and appealing one, or simply a bunch of people just banging on drums and loud kartals and whoppers? Would that be more? It would be more pleasing to Prabhupada that this so-called traditional approach is implemented, or that someone who is a qualified person and needs Krishna consciousness will be actually attracted to and inquire and perhaps form part of a society. So I do struggle with stuff like that. Same with the literature. Tell you the truth, I was having a discussion with Jayadvaita Swami, who is qualified in many ways. But when I mention creative nonfiction, as even the Lilamrita is creative nonfiction, because you can't reproduce every single dialogue that took place and every single word, even though Prabhupada was extensively documented by the most documented religious personality ever, because we have lectures and walks and conversations and everything possible filmed as well. But there are things that are not exactly literal, because you can't recall everything like that. And when I mentioned creative nonfiction, which is something that attracts me, to be able to present some truth in your own voice. You're not trying to change it. It's simply you have to fill some of the gaps in a intelligent way, in an attractive way, in a literary way. And he said that category doesn't exist, creative nonfiction. So I was at odds with this, and I think we do have to find out the happy medium where we all need to agree. I mean, we may agree to disagree in certain aspects of the culture, but personally, I do miss culture. I don't want to be a army. I don't want to be associated with, I don't want to be listening to rock and roll, but I want to hear our own culture being elevated and formed, and to increase to the point that we actually require some skill in order to perform it, not simply because you got a Brahman thread or you've been initiated for a long time. Now you're qualified automatically. I think cultivate is. So I want your opinion on this.
My vision, and it may be wrong, but it is my personal vision, and I think in many ways Srila Prabhupada wanted that, but that's questionable, and we can discuss it, of course, is that we need to build a very rich culture. It seems that religious and philosophical traditions, and this verse alludes to, as I read, they only really do well when there is a lot of culture and thought and literature and royal patronage there. And that when they become emaciated, they tend towards some of the negative features of religion. I don't want to identify ISKCON just with religion, but let's talk about religions. Why not? When they become culturally emaciated, then they lean towards fundamentalism, terrorism, and other similar phenomena. Yeah, I think we need that culture, actually, and I think there's also I'm asking myself, what are the reasons for that? And one reason may be that ISKCON is definitely affected by the culture in which we live and the trends, whatever the kind of zeitgeist is, the culture of the age. And one of them is to say that, all taste is equal. I read just yesterday, I think it was called the phrase or the word was heteronormality. They're against this idea that you promote heterosexuality as normal. So this idea that anyone can have any kind of influence over normality or standards, or perhaps you might say objective standards rather than just subjective standards, is wrong. So we're all equal. Whatever art we produce must be equally valued. There are no higher and lower standards. This kind of idea is really prevalent in society. I don't think that's part of our tradition. I think we have a way of grading values, whether it's applied to morality or to aesthetics. Those are the two main areas. And that is we have sattva, rajas, and tamas. And this is a way whereby we get round the pitfall of discussing Western culture or Indian culture or American culture or whatever. We have a very useful framework for evaluating, because you have to judge. But this idea, thou shalt not judge at all, is misleading. And I don't think it's going to lead to a good place. Some people have called it the race to the bottom. You know, it'll end up with us validating the lowest values. And Srila Prabhupada was very, very clear. As soon as the Shudra values predominate, we're finished. So I personally am a great supporter of having that culture, because I think a disembodied spirituality will not work. A diamond needs a ring or some kind of setting, and I think it's absolutely essential. I suggest that the verse I read today is definitely evidence that we need to go in that direction. We need to establish a Brahminical culture. Brahminical culture means it's guided by the topmost levels of knowledge and aesthetics and so on. It has to be a rich culture. I don't see it as a poor one. By the way, just to let you know, I was actually thinking of all the pageantry associated with the Queen's funeral, and some of you may have watched it, some of you may have not. But the question I ask is this: where else in the world will you find something that most resembles the pageantry and the ceremony and the etiquette that attended Lord Krishna's departure from Hastinapur and his entry into Dwarka? The elephants, the ladies standing on the balconies, that was the etiquette. They wouldn't go on the street. Showering flowers. The ladies didn't want to cry because they were fearful that tears would be inauspicious. The elephants, the chariots. Srila Prabhupada mentions elsewhere that aesthetics was there even in warfare, and he was glorifying it for that being the case. Now, go back to the pageantry of the Queen. Where else will you find it in the world? Do you want to have gray men in gray suits? There's something symbolic about that. And it has a connection to God. It has a connection to the Supreme. If you take that away, you take away God ultimately. And there's a big discourse now about privilege, as if privilege is wrong. What a stupid idea. It is complete madness that privilege is wrong, because privilege can be measured in terms of 6 things: wealth, strength, learning, beauty, renunciation, and fame. Yeah, Bhagavan. So you're against privilege? You want to get rid of all those things? The problem isn't privilege, it's abuse of privilege. That is the problem. Yeah. And you actually saw in the life of, go back, Queen Elizabeth II. Okay, people are envious. They say she had this, she had that. But I'd ask you, could they spend a day doing the duties that she had to do? Public engagements, at least more than one a day on average, far more probably. You have to meet people, you have to remember their names. You've got very little private life. You do. She did have time, of course, for private life, but not so much. Could you actually do it? And my thesis is that in a good social system, and I'm a supporter of hierarchy, I think there should be class by qualification and meritocracy. I think that's necessary. I think the idea of a classless society is extremely dangerous, because all you're doing is building another class. You're building a different class society based only on wealth with little reference to values. That's a problem. This idea of a classless society is a problem. Sounds great, takes the moral high ground, but it won't work. You'll actually get another type of class based on wealth alone and power alone, and you'll purge it of values and of virtues. So a good society, the obligations of the higher classes outweigh the privileges. Therefore, a Kshatriya has to fight. Yes, I personally am grateful if someone goes to fight for me. I don't want to fight. I'm glad I'm not in Russia at the moment. I'm glad that someone else goes there. The Brahmins have to perform great austerities. Why would we begrudge them having some say in what is real knowledge and what is falsehood? Anyway, that's my own vision. And yeah, everything that goes, this again, my conclusion is this pageantry, this acknowledgement of the relationship between governance and the supreme is extremely important, and it should not be eroded, because as soon as you erode the virtues, particularly virtues, there's a lot of virtues associated with it, actually. And again, what was the focus of the Kshatriyas? It was Dharma. It wasn't Artha, Kama, or Moksha. Of course, Moksha was there, but that was mainly for the Brahmins. But Dharma, they had a love of Dharma. Let the moon slip from its orbit. Let the seas dry up. I will not break my vow. That was the love of Dharma. I mean, goodness, a virtue, nobility. Again, not popular, maybe not popular with some people, particularly a vocal minority. But my own conclusion, and this verse, just to round up, talks about Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga is defined as the age of iron, but it's also defined as the age of quarrel and hypocrisy. And my thesis is those two things, quarrel and hypocrisy, are the greatest threat to spreading Krishna consciousness. And I'm saying not just outside of ISKCON, but inside ISKCON as well. So therefore, we have to engage with virtues, and I think those virtues, not just the kind of what might be called theological or devotional virtues, but also the virtues connected to our particular station in life. But I think if we ignore those, there is room for, the word slipperiness comes into mind, moving around and being opportunistic, not accepting that this, as a teacher, for example, is my responsibility. These are my virtues. I'm an administrator. These are my virtues, and I have to accept them. Therefore, if you're an administrator, you must accept the virtues associated with that particular vana, which means primarily protection of others. If you're concerned mainly for money, that's fine. Generate wealth, but you're not on the level of a Kshatriya. Let's read our books. I mean, what does it say about? What does it say about? What does Sheila Prabhupada's teachings say about this? Sheila Prabhupada says, to finish off this section, we must go on. Sometimes we're accused that we go to preach amongst the richest section. Actually, the Bhagavad Gita was meant for the richest section who used to control. That is the kings. Because if the king is educated nicely in spiritual affairs, if he knows what is the purpose of kingdom, what is the purpose of ruling, then all the citizens automatically become religious, purposeful. And if the king is a rascal, the leader is a rascal, naturally all others will follow and they will become rascals. Therefore, in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 4th chapter, you'll find that Krishna is teaching first off, Imang vivasvate yogam pruktavanaham avyayam. Bhagavad Gita chapter 4, verse 1. He taught this philosophy to the sun god. So it seems that actually Bhagavad Gita contains many instructions. I would suggest not just on the purpose of human life, but also on how governance can be conducted so that people can reach that ultimate end of life. Let's open up for questions. I've spoken too much. Or comments, please.
Anyone, devotees?
Anyone? Gauri, Devaki Preeti, Jagannath Pandit Prabhu, Chintamani, Tarika Prabhu, how are you?
Hare Krishna, thank you for the thought-provoking discussion. You talking about the loss for how to describe this now. I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty to gather my thoughts.
No, that's okay. Take your time, or we can, yeah, as you wish. Yeah, take your time.
Yeah, perhaps I'm not awake enough for this, but I do think a lot about some of the prevailing ideas in society, which are presents a challenge for us in our endeavors to propagate Krishna consciousness. Because much of what is being generated in society at present, it seems to me, is coming from a position of essentially atheism. The element of God consciousness is just missing, and so it means then that anything goes. Any sort of idea is acceptable. We can reform society. We can create a better world. We just have to think this through and find ways in which we can manage things more equitably. Wherever you're coming from is okay. We have to learn to accept one another as we are, or perverse our habits, our behavior, and ideas may be. We must all learn to accept one another, and you know, obviously, much of what society is contrary to fundamental principles of consciousness, the cultivation of God consciousness, and elevation of human consciousness. We're moving rapidly towards a condition of degradation. People are becoming more and more stick in their behavior and ideas. And this is actually a question that I'm trying to formulate here. I'm trying to understand how do we in that kind of a setting, how do we propagate Krishna consciousness? You know, how do you deal with prevailing ideas that you know, we're now living in a society in which people don't know which bathroom to use. There's confusion as to is there even such a thing as gender, or are there many genders, and trying to introduce consciousness in a society which has somehow come to the point of rejecting all reasonable notions, all and religious ideas in particular. And you spoke about the zero. Yeah, just breaking down everything, reestablishing everything from scratch. It's a serious movement in the world, trying to create a new system in the hopes that something superior can be established, but with no sound basis, basically winging it, just trying to come up with good ideas without really having thought things through very well, and without the benefit of the sound counsel of whatever has come before, whether religious or social or political. Seems to me it's becoming a lot harder to try to introduce Krishna consciousness. And for ourselves, you spoke about culture, and my view is that Srila Prabhupada absolutely was creating a cultural, because it's very difficult to try to cultivate Krishna consciousness independently of culture. Culture is a tremendous support system for the cultivation of Krishna consciousness. So the establishment of regular festivals, the various Vaishnava calendar events, is a very big aspect of culture, which is just support. There are many examples, but much of what Srila Prabhupada established was all about culture. Trying to make our introducing our Vaishnava culture, which is based on a Brahminical culture, to yes, you could call culture. It's just seems to me it's becoming a deal more challenging. Curious to know how you thought you might bridge some of the great gaps and chasms developing between our perspective and the direction that the world is moving in.
Well, a few thoughts on that, if I can. Thank you, Prabhu. I think first we need to actually move as quickly as we can to the Madhyam Adhikari level, and we need to differentiate between the malicious, the envious, and those who are innocent. And I think actually there's probably a larger number of innocent people than we sometimes think. I am surprised, just by my study in moral philosophy at the moment, how many philosophers touch on issues that Srila Prabhupada's books touch on. I'm surprised how much they see similar problems. Probably a little less, they come up with good solutions, or they touch on solutions which are similar to ours. So I think actually we've got to give up this idea of Krishna consciousness being simply, let's get out of here as soon as possible. It's sensible to aspire for liberation, but I'm not sure that is our main focus. Our main focus, I think, is preaching, but I would frame that preaching in terms of something which is much more long-term, particularly those of us who have been around for a while. The greatest need, I think, is to establish a long-term future for ISKCON and to think about it very, very carefully. And I think that means not just running away from this world, but can we go in there judiciously and carefully at times. We may have to be cautious at times, but we also have to be courageous. Can we actually enter into the dialogue and make a difference? Can we authentically enter the dialogue? And for that, we're going to need to be expert in particular subjects. If we want to speak, for example, on what you're alluding to the atheism, great. Let's go in there and look at it. By the way, I'll make a point here. I think that a lot of people are atheists these days for good reason. And that is because of the hypocrisy that religions have shown. I think intelligent people often become atheists because of the bad example set by religious leaders and followers. That's my conclusion. It's not always a good argument because whatever religious people do, and I refer to people like Dawkins, he seems to think that because religious people have done a lot of bad things, therefore God doesn't exist. Bad argument. That God's existence or non-existence is completely independent of what religious people do, particularly in Kali Yuga. However, the ability to help people appreciate that God might exist very much depends on our integrity or our hypocrisy. And I think actually religion has lost it, as many other ideologies, ultimately by the lack of virtue of those who are propounding such doctrines. I think that's our biggest problem. Everyone's been let down. The leaders let them down. The parents let them down. The animals are let down by the farmers. Everyone is actually being, if you like, betrayed by those who have the responsibility for their welfare. So I think you're right. Atheism is not good, but I think actually we might be better to also look at the issue of ethics, because I think there are a lot of people who are interested in ethics and values. A lot of people are interested in the decline of moral standards, I think. And the other thing is, we've got a lot of this libertarianism where democracy, of course, had a challenge. And one of the challenges with democracy, it was identified early on, is that actually the majority may repress the minorities. So actually then we gave voice to minorities. And actually much of the prominent voice in the kind of social economic discourse, particularly regarding, multiple genders and so on, a lot of this is actually being led not by a majority, but by minorities. And actually there is a kind of silent majority who's objecting to this. By the way, I think they've got a lot of good points in terms of the problem: lack of equality, discrimination, violence against people because of their sexual or racial or whatever orientation. That is wrong. And there's a lot we share with these people when it comes to the problem. One of the challenges with the modern discourse is people think that if you do not agree with my solution, you're automatically part of the problem. And that's completely nuts. I mean, it's not logical at all. If you don't agree with my particular solution, you must actually be colluding with the problem. That's not true. I may actually fully agree as a doctor that this is the illness, this is what you've got, but I think this is the prescription, whereas another doctor thinks there's another prescription. So unfortunately, that's the kind of discourse we live in. And we should also, I think, as devotees, be very careful in thinking that anyone who doesn't believe in our solution is therefore automatically part of the problem, if that makes sense. I think we need to be very, very careful to differentiate. And I think actually, our focus could sometimes be much more on appreciating the human condition that we're all in. All of us are in this condition of getting old and suffering sickness, and we're going to die, and thinking, which is better? Shall I die young, or shall I, check out early, or shall I endure old age? This isn't just something devotees kind of have some kind of awareness of. It's niggling away, at least, at all of us, whether we're devotees or not. And people have got struggles. They're struggling also. Even if it's just something like, how do I control my eating? Because if I eat too much, I'll become unhealthy. I'll put on weight. They're struggling with that. So this kind of perception that I want to enjoy life, but actually my enjoyment isn't working and it may not be leading me in the right direction. That kind of perception of the human condition, which is really articulated in our books, the tension between enjoying the world and then the desire to renounce it, often sour grapes. People kind of understand this in a way. It's their struggle. And I think we need to make Krishna consciousness accessible to people, listen to them, enter into the conversation, and become qualified and trained in our particular area of preaching so that we can genuinely go into the conversation and change people's minds and hearts. I think if we just discount them, they're all karmis, they're atheists, and I don't think that'll be that helpful. We need to see there are many people out there who are potential devotees, and we have to go and reach out to them. But we have to do it in such a way that we know what we're talking about so that we can enter into the conversation and change their minds and hearts. Does that make sense? We need that kind of empathy for people. But we also I think we need training now, education and training, so that we know. One of the biggest problems is if we think, I've read the Bible, I've read the Quran, I've read the Bhagavad Gita, I can now give you an answer to everything. And I've been reading one philosopher called Michel de Montaigne. He was French, but he was a good philosopher. He was a Roman Catholic, actually, but he was very much into this idea of being self-analytical and asking questions. We have to do that now. We can't take the view that actually we know everything simply on the basis of reading some religious text. I mean, potentially that's there. Everything's there in Srila Prabhupada's books, but I think it's going to take a lot more study and training on our behalf, rather than to think when I've been around for 2 or 3 years that I can start to, spout off answers to things. Does that make sense? A certain humility is needed in this process. Srila Prabhupada's books are great. We may have full faith in them, but have we yet grasped them? Have we developed a real understanding? Are we prepared to undergo the kind of pedagogical and spiritual and contemplative processes to really grasp what Srila Prabhupada says, that we can actually change people's hearts and minds? I think we can, but it's going to take some time. And therefore, this whole narrative where you don't need to be qualified to take to Krishna consciousness, it can be misappropriated and misused. Because after taking to the process of Krishna consciousness, it is expected that as we advance, we do develop some good qualities. Yeah? No one's excluded, that's true. But as we advance, and if we don't become qualified, we're not going to spread this Krishna consciousness. We can actually glorify Srila Prabhupada black and blue, but they're going to start looking at us also, right? And then it becomes problematic. When there's a disparity of values, that's when it becomes difficult. And that's when spreading Krishna consciousness will be less effective. Of course, there'll always be some disparity. We always fall short of the glory of God, if you like. We fall short of our values. That's fine. But how we engage with that conversation is extremely important. I think that's so. My response to you, Tarika Prabhu, is to yes, there are a lot of horrible things I don't like about British culture. I don't like the dog culture. I don't like the meat eating. But something about the Queen's funeral told me, my God, there's something good here. And if we need to change that, rather than kind of tearing it down or waiting for maybe Putin to drop a few atom bombs so we can start from scratch. If you're thinking that's going to work, get a counselor. I'm sorry. if you really think that the end coming to human civilization is going to make everyone realize that Krishna consciousness is true, and we're going to be able to build society immediately after that, I really think you should get some help. I'm sorry, that's not going to work. It may collapse. Societies may collapse at some stage, but I mean, don't kind of hang around waiting for it to happen before you do anything. You know, I'm sorry. I think that is really. I'm sorry for the fact that I'm being bold here, but please consider these points. I think we need to enter into the conversation, and I think we're going to need a lot more education and training for that. And I think in two areas particularly, I think in teaching, training good teachers, and I think the other area is good governance, because actually any lack of integrity or lack of skill in governance is going to cause problems. It has already eroded the faith of many devotees. That's not to be critical of the unnecessarily, but I do think we need to actually look to the future and see that we will need this in the future. We're going to have to build particularly good governance and good educational systems in order to push, to create sound communities, to build people's faith, and to go on in the future sustainably as Srila Prabhupada wanted. I'm sorry I've gone on too long. Tarika Prabhu, anything you'd like to say to that?
You've not gone on too long. We're trying to perpetuate the discussion here, just trying to hear. I appreciate your points. Yeah, we don't want to become an additional part of the problem. We've seen that other religious systems have actually given religion itself a bad name by their poor behavior, and that's another challenge that we have to contend with. So we have to heal ourselves. I have one other thing that I wanted to run past you. Just curious to see what you might think of. I'm seeing that, at least here in the United States, particularly, the ideological left seems to have adopted as their unofficial religion something which they call secular humanism, predicated on the idea that you don't have to be religious to be good. So it's becoming a predominant force now in the United States. Are you aware of this?
I'm a little aware of it. By the way, I've got to go in 1 or 2 minutes. So Tarek, I may not be able to carry on this discussion right now too long.
Yeah,
I am aware of it. But again, I think they do have some emphasis on values. Let's enter into that conversation if necessary. Yeah. But differentiating between those who are actually, I mean, by the way, some of the humanists I've met, I was at a conference probably about 15 years ago in Windsor, and they were more preachy and evangelical than anyone else. A couple of the seculars, they were trying to convert people, and they were complaining, and it was horrible. It was very made us feel uncomfortable. But there are some good points they've got as well. So I think we need to enter into that conversation with them. But by the way, with regards to the left-wing agenda here and the wokeism and so on, the last year, I'd say 18 months, there's been a huge shift against that, and people are now speaking against it. So I think we need to be aware of what, I think your point is good, that we need to be aware of what's going on. We don't live in the 60s. We can't preach like we did in the 60s. We do need to, or at least some of our leaders need to be aware of the social climate, the moral climate in which we live. And I think that's a great point you brought up, actually. But I think again that, perhaps we need to address people. I think ultimately there's a case for saying that actually to be good, you need to be a theist. But I think probably it's not good for us to always go down the route of are you a theist or atheist, and perhaps to address people who are interested, genuinely interested in the good and in ethics and morality. That's my feeling, because you might find actually amongst them are a lot of potential devotees, even though at the moment they're a little bit peeved with religion as they perceive it. That's my feeling. I must go now. I'm sorry, Tarika Prabhu. I didn't mean to cut you off, and I'm sorry, but I must go. And all the best. Nice to see you all. I hope that was somewhat useful. And by the way, if you have any disagreements, I'm happy to discuss further, because I may not always get it right. But I think this candid discussion is very helpful. It is very much needed in our society.
I just want to end with first and the nicest definition I heard of secular humanism, which is that there are people looking for God, hoping that He's not there. That was a very cute definition of secular humanism. And another one that you touched upon very briefly, which was about humility. And I quote one of your co-patriots, Winston Churchill, who said, "In the course of my life, I have often had to eat my words, and I must confess that I always found that a very wholesome diet." So we should learn from that actually humility is even one of Krishna's qualities. That of course we can call it detachment in that case, because he has it in the greatest degree. He has everything, and he doesn't care about it. So he's not proud about his accomplishments. Okay, well, we'll let you go, Prabhu. Well, thank you very much. I'm gonna ask the devotees to briefly unmute yourselves and offer their acknowledgement and gratitude to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Very enlivening discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, devotees. We'll see you soon. Hare Krishna.